Hello, and welcome to the Rituals of Coda. My name is Brian Lederman. I head up the customers team at Coda. And today we are going to walk you through some of our most important rituals, not only what they are, but how we utilize them in our everyday lives and across our teams, across the organization. So with me, we have four great Codans to share their rituals, and we will go ahead and meet the panel here in just a second. By now, you've heard a lot about rituals. If you've been tuning in, you've heard about rituals from Shashir and our distinguished guests. And as Ben Gordon has quoted, rituals have three core attributes. They're named, they're templated, and every new employee knows them by the end of their first week. So let's meet our panelists and let's jump into the rituals of Coda. As we go around the room, can you tell me who you are, what you do here at Coda, and maybe one of your favorite Coda docs? And we'll start with you, Lane.
Thanks, Brian. My name's Lane. I lead the product and design teams at Coda. Many favorite docs. One of them is Eigenquestions, doc that Matt wrote. With that, I'll pass it to you, Matt.
Thanks, Lane. My name is Matt Hudson. I'm responsible for the growth and go-to-market teams here at Coda. So that's all business functions outside of HR, finance, legal, that kind of thing. So think sales, marketing, partnerships, data science, etc. I was part of the founding team here at Coda, so I've watched kind of our rituals evolve over the years as we've grown. Prior to Coda, I was at Google and YouTube for a couple of years as a product manager, as Shashir's chief of staff, and as part of their finance team. Favorite doc, I'd probably say is my weekly planner. I'm somewhat obsessive when it comes to my relationship with time management. So I basically break my day down into 15-minute increments, record all that in a Google Calendar, and then I use a Coda doc to sync that all down and categorize it. And I can start every week knowing how much time I'm going to spend with my kids or when I'm going to be working on tech products related to YouTube, related to Coda or whatnot. So yeah, with that, I'll popcorn to Raechel.
Yes. Hi, everyone. So happy to be here. I'm Raechel, and I lead the people team at Coda. Been here about 4.5 years. And as far as my favorite Coda doc goes, same. There's a lot of them. I think the one that's top of mind for me right now, because we're starting to plan a virtual offsite, is actually Claire's offsite toolkit. I think it does a great job of thinking about bringing teams together, bonding them, and makes organizing it very easy. And off to Helena.
Hey everybody, I'm Helena. I'm a design lead here at Coda. I work on the leads ecosystem team. You can think of it kind of like a top of funnel or growth team. And my favorite doc is a doc that we have for the design team. It's a public doc where we kind of put our values, who's on the team, and you have like a little page for each person on the team. And it's just an awesome way to kind of get a feel for the team, get people to share out. And also, when we're hiring, a way to kind of share externally what we're all about as a design team here.
That's great. Thanks, everyone. As I mentioned, I head up the customers team. I actually joined Coda just about 5 months ago. So my previous favorite doc was my new hire orientation and getting started guide. That was my Bible every single day for my first couple of months. But now we are in Q4, and like most sales leaders, my favorite doc is my sales pipeline doc. And we're using the new Salesforce pack that you heard about earlier today to bring in a whole bunch of great CRM data. So we'll talk a lot more about that and other rituals and docs that we use to run our business as we go through the session. As I mentioned, I joined Coda about 5 months ago, and one of the first things that I noticed when I joined the organization was how we run meetings. From one-on-ones to team meetings and company all-hands, Coda operates in a little bit of a different manner than I was used to. And it took me some time to get used to the way that we run meetings. But once I really figured out the benefit of these meetings, I started to realize that this was a really key ritual how Coda operates. Lane actually recently published a document called Two-Way Writeups, that really walks us through these rituals of how we run meetings at Coda. And Lane, to kick things off, can you walk us through the two-way write-up doc?
Yeah, I'd love to. So yeah, recently published a doc. This is one of the most common questions that we get at Coda. How does Coda actually run on Coda? What are all the interesting and creative ways that you as a team use the product? So this doc published recently starts with a very basic observation. That observation is about every 20 years or so, we undergo some sort of change in the way that work gets discussed and decided and presented upon. And so wanted to sort of highlight the different phases there to start. The first phase is really presentations. And this was, begun really in earnest when PowerPoint launched. It was the first time that a lot of us could manipulate shapes and, color fonts and add clip art and fun stuff like that. A totally magical tool at the time, right? But at the same time, we've all had the experience of, sitting through a bunch of slides, waiting to get to the discussion, and trying to figure out, when we could have the core hard discussion that needed to happen to make progress for the team. The second phase is what we call one-way write-ups. And one-way write-ups, we call them that because as the author, you're the one kind of doing all the talking. You're the one sort of putting the proposal forward. And a lot of the commentary is relegated kind of to the right margin where comments are. This, I think, was driven sort of from a historical perspective by two main things. The first was the advent of Google Docs. So Writely was a little startup that was acquired by Google, became Google Docs. And what you had was real-time in-document collaboration for the first time in history, which is completely mind-blowing for those of us that lived through that period, moving from kind of an offline or file-based world into a cloud-based real-time editor. The other thing that happened at that time was Jeff Bezos wrote a very famous memo now around no more PowerPoint inside of Amazon. And that led a transition that they called Amazon 6-pagers, where it was a ritual that they would start meetings with reading a 6-page write-up that was very clearly articulating the proposal, what was the team going to go do, instead of starting with a long slide deck that everyone had to kind of sit through. And this was transformative, right? Like people went from having to sit through presentations or, craft 50, 100 slide decks to just being able to succinctly write their proposal. So I think this is a huge step forward. And we think the next phase is what we call two-way write-ups. And two-way write-ups start from this principle that your audience is part of making that proposal, that brief, that decision better. And so they treat that audience as part of the conversation, part of the feedback, wanting to answer their questions, wanting to make the proposal, the decision, whatever it is, better. So that's sort of where the historical perspective came in. Before Coda, I spent about 10 years at Google and YouTube in various product roles. And I sort of noticed three main problems with the way that one-way write-ups were done there. And again, one-way write-ups were kind of the default way of getting work done at Google and YouTube. The night before big reviews, I would have this feeling of, I want to know who's read this write-up that I just sent out. I'd send out the write-up and I'd sort of wait and look for avatars in the document. And that would be my sign of like, has the key stakeholder read this particular proposal or not? Which seems like kind of ridiculous and silly in retrospect. But it was a behavior that I was sort of doing because I was trying to figure out who's read it. I want to make progress. I want to make sure that the key stakeholders have actually weighed in. The second is the feedback that you get in one-way write-ups is often very unstructured. And so what I mean by this is, every comment in a Google Doc that appears in that sort of small right rail appears exactly the same. It's a comment on spelling looks exactly the same as, this is blocking feedback from a core person on the team. And so one of the things that two-way write-ups tries to do is structure that feedback a little bit more. The third observation was questions often get buried either in those mega comment threads or worse, in people's heads. So in those mega comment threads that I saw a lot inside of Google and YouTube, you would have one person who started with a question or observation, and then there'd be a series of questions that sort of spanned in a long comment thread. And so, there was that. And then there was also the behavior of someone just not asking the really important question because they didn't feel like asking it, or they didn't want to do it in a big setting, a big meeting or something like that. So those are kind of the three observations that drove us to coin this term two-way write-ups, which I'll talk about now. So two-way write-ups are really kind of a solution to those three problems. And let me show you how they kind of map directly. The first one is a very simple one. It's a done reading reaction. So you'll see as I hover over this little reaction, you can see the exact names of people who have hit this reaction. And this is, it's small, but it's quite impactful, because now instead of starting a meeting by saying like, who's read this proposal, and sort of searching across Zoom tiles in this day and age and trying to figure out who's read it and who hasn't, or, having a 10-person meeting and it maybe starting with maybe having 9 people who have read the proposal, I can just go ahead and get started. That way I sort of know when to get going and I know who's read it. Simple, but impactful. The second one is what we call Pulse. Shashir talked about Pulse and Dory in the keynote, but this is an absolutely essential ritual inside of Coda. And the way it works is basically people will send out a write-up, and then there will be a Pulse and a Dory at the bottom of that write-up. And you'll start by leaving it this box unchecked, which means that I can write my reflection here. And then when I'm done, what I can do is check this box, and then I can see everybody else's reflection. And this is pretty game-changing, because you want to see how people feel, not about one particular part of that write-up. You want to see how they feel about the whole thing. I always wanted to know, I saw a couple comments from this person, but are they generally okay with this proposal when I worked inside of Google and YouTube? And so this is a great way to do that. The other fun thing that I see a lot inside of Coda is people customizing this to fit their needs, in particular to structure a particular question that they need an answer to as a team. So 2 examples come to mind. One is, a lot of times people will say something like, what should we do next? And that's kind of the structure of the Pulse. Like, they want to know, what should our next steps be in your opinion, so that we can kind of take that input as a team. The other one is, maybe it's a controversial topic and they want to know what everyone's fears are. And that way they can kind of gather those fears up front. And so, later down in time, when people are, actually launching that, they know what everyone's going to be worried about, from different parts of the organization, support and marketing and other product teams. The third element is what we call Dory. And this is another one that Shashir talked about in the keynote. So Dory is very simply a way to make sure that you're getting the most important question and answering the most important question. So the way this ritual works inside of Coda is we'll have a write-up, people will read that write-up, and then we'll take a minute and everyone will kind of add their questions. And as people add questions, other people are upvoting those questions, and we'll take a minute and have everyone kind of upvote questions. And that way, the most important question rises to the top. I'm sure you've had the experience of listening to like the highest paid person in the room, or the loudest person in the room kind of dominate all the questions. And this is just another example of how to sort of get around that and make sure that whatever is on the mind of the team is rising to the top and you're actually addressing it. So that's sort of the summary of what two-way write-ups are inside of Coda. If you want to see a real example of that, you can sort of check out this one. This is a real thing that launched. We took a real proposal or a real write-up inside of Coda, and you can see, the team outlines the proposal, outlines the concerns that they've heard from different people, and then at the end there's a done reading button and a set of sentiment from the Pulse and a set of questions that got addressed in the meeting in that case. This can also be used asynchronously. So a lot of times you'll see people add a Dory, and then they'll add an answers column, and they'll just address questions asynchronously as they come up. And that way, they may not even need to do this in the context of a meeting. So that's kind of a brief rundown of what we do at Coda. turn it back over to you, Brian.
Great, thanks, Lane. Really love seeing dark mode, by the way. And again, a reminder to the audience, you can find those docs in our gallery. We have a lot of variations around two-way write-ups here at Coda. And as Lane mentioned, one of the benefits of two-way write-ups ritual is that it can be really adopted to different teams and different needs. So we'll turn it over to the rest of the panelists. We'd love to hear how have you tailored these rituals to fit certain needs across your team? And I think we'll start with maybe Helena.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that was a really awesome intro from Lane. And one of the things he discussed, is a Dory. And on the product team and as a designer, one of the challenges that I always have when I'm kicking off a project is how do you make sure that you have the right context, the right feedback right as you're kicking off the project? How do you know what's kind of top of mind for folks? So one ritual that I like to do is to host an open meeting with the broader team and start getting ideas and feedback from them right away. And one kind of twist that I add to my Dories is this sentence starter brainstorm is what I call it. And so it works like a typical Dory, except you have this column here where it has a sentence starter. For example, our users would love it if. And then, of course, you can customize these as well. But the idea here is to guide the feedback in some way so that you make sure that you're getting the right level of feedback, but still leave enough room for people to express themselves. And because people can vote up these different ideas and contexts, then you kind of know at the end what's top of mind for the team. And then you're kind of more ready to really get the project going. And it raises awareness for the team as well that you're about to kick off the project. So yeah, that's one thing that I like to do with Dories.
Yeah, I have to say I love those question starters too. I know we've used those in a couple other groups at Coda, both in our gender equity and also our anti-racism discussion groups. And they've, even on sometimes really tough topics to discuss, they've allowed, thoughts to flow and allowed for really rich discussion. So I'd +1 to that. But to your point, Helena, of like the Dories allowing us to run more inclusive meetings, one tweak we've made to the Dory that I've seen kind of boost our inclusivity and I'd say decrease bias, especially around whose ideas or feedback you're upvoting within the Dory, is to hide the author column. So as you saw with Lane, showed you that Dory again, like when you click to add an idea, you're automatically added as the author. And what we've done is hide that. So when I go in to read what's in a Dory, I don't know if it's my friend, that product marketing manager who wrote that comment, or a recruiting coordinator, or our CEO. But what that, hiding the author, what that allows for is me to really focus on what's most important and what I think should be raised, for all of us to discuss as a group. And I've seen this really amplify and frankly build confidence in Codans, some of our newer Codans and new grads or early career folks or folks that are just a little bit shyer to raise questions out loud. And this helps us bring ideas to the forefront from everyone, as we've talked about, kind of really give everyone a seat at the table.
One other anecdote, Lane mentioned a little bit earlier how Dories can help raise the most important questions you should be discussing as a group, even if it's not necessarily included in the write-up. At Coda, sometimes we call those Eigenquestions. It's like a phrase that we've used to describe like a question when you're looking at a problem that tends to answer a bunch of other questions once you've solved it. And actually, I think this is a sales pipeline doc. I think this is for later for this screen share. But to give an example of it, a couple of years ago, when we were launching Coda's pricing model, we call it maker billing, where you only charge for doc makers. We don't charge for editors or collaborators or viewers in your doc. At the time, that was a totally non-obvious way to go. I think if you do a blanket survey across lots of SaaS tools, you'll end up seeing per user pricing that's just paying for every seat for folks that are active in the tool or whatnot. And with Coda, we weren't really sure what the right route was for us. So in this process of choosing, like, what does our pricing model look like? We had all sorts of questions in front of us. How many SKUs do we have? What goes in each SKU? What's the price point for each one? And after kind of going through this process of sitting in a few of these meetings where we had these equivalent of two-way write-ups with lots of these questions surfacing and getting voted up, we realized in that flow that there was one question in particular, which was, should we put a price point or a dollar sign on the share button in a doc after you've built a great doc? Is that like, do we want the last prompt for you to be, do I have to pay for the rest of my team for them to be able to go in and edit OKRs or participate in this planning cycle or whatnot? And the emphatic answer was no. Like, we knew that was like not what we wanted to do, and we wanted you to be able to share with your team somewhat freely. And once we made that choice, it then answered all these other questions that was somewhat enabled by like having a Dory and being able to look at which questions are the most important for a specific topic.
Another plug for the gallery. You can find Matt's write-up on Eigenquestions in the gallery. And I think there's a lot of makers in the audience that are very happy that we landed on the maker billing model and that they can scale Coda across their organizations. Just a quick comment on Raechel's as well. One of the things that I was really inspired by when I joined Coda was how flat the organization is. And it's amazing to see, new interns that have a really clear and loud voice just by simply hiding the author column in a Dory. So really great best practice, and thanks for sharing. One of the things that's been really interesting about rituals recently is how they have quickly evolved. And we just shared a few examples of how you can tailor rituals to suit the needs of your team. But a lot of our teams and our companies, the entire dynamic has changed as we've had to shift to this remote first workplace. And I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk about how we have adapted some of these rituals for a distributed workforce. Can we share a little bit more around how these have evolved, and then maybe some best practices for the audience in terms of how can they adapt some of their rituals for this distributed environment?
Yeah, so I'll jump in here. One adaptation that's been super helpful as we've become a distributed company is our pre-meeting check-ins, our pre-meeting pulse checks. So when we join a meeting, we take a few minutes to add your sentiment, fill out what's top of mind for you, both professionally and actually also personally. And I've seen this pulse check-in to be helpful, I'd say in at least three ways, although I'm sure there's more. The first is, as we all know, 2021 has been challenging for a ton of reasons. And the pulse helped people name what's on their mind, again, positive or negative, and be able to set it aside so that they could be, truly present in the meeting. Similarly, once people got used to sharing what was top of mind, we saw this really build empathy. I remember sharing at one point, oh gosh, my 2 young kids were up all night. I'm super tired. I probably shared that more than once, and I'm really tired coming into this meeting. And another parent with slightly older kids, empathized over that and shared kind of the tough times their kids were going through. And it allowed us to bond and kind of build that empathy and I think get into kind of a more meatier discussion once we were in the meeting. You can do that with positive things too, not just kids being up all night, but moving across the country. We had a number of engagements at Coda last year, finishing classes. So finding ways to kind of build those bonds across the team and celebrate. And the third, so first being, setting aside things to be present. Second being building empathy. The third, I would say, is it allows managers to keep an even closer pulse on how folks are really doing. For whatever reason, I think some people are a little bit more open to sharing what's on their mind in these pulse check-ins, compared to other forums or other one-on-ones. One person on the team, I remember I started to see fewer coffee cups or smiley faces. I can't remember what it was at the time, but those started to go down. I'd see hints of stress or feeling a little bit stretched thin. And because started to pick up on those patterns and those signals, that they were really only giving off in these pulse checks, kind of dug into that in one-on-one, realized that they were too stretched thin, figured out a plan together to obviously delegate and find more of a work-life balance, and frankly, kind of their overall well-being and performance went up from that. So super helpful, you know, in this distributed world we're in to get those pulse checks from the team on, you know, not even like a daily or weekly basis, but even meeting by meeting.
Just to jump in off some of the threads Raechel was pulling on there, flashing back to like right after we made our pricing choice, kind of going back to the anecdote I was just giving. That was late 2019 when we launched pricing. And at the time we had a really small go-to-market team, only really one person that was in a true like selling capacity, and a couple folks that were focused more on customer success and engagement. And shortly after we get all of our existing users or customers migrated over into this pricing plan is when COVID hit. Started at the beginning of 2020. And we went from having like a weekly team meeting where we'd kind of see each other to all being remote. And actually, if I bring up this that doc we were showing a little bit earlier on sales pipeline, Joe Demento, who currently runs our enterprise team, at the time was running a smaller group, and he's got this published doc where he talks through kind of how we ran our weekly, what I guess you would call it a weekly pipeline sync, or just a weekly like sales and success sync. And the idea behind it was we were about 5 people at the time, but the way we do it is instead of starting the meeting, like an hour-long meeting with everyone giving their roundtable updates, we had folks go in and record their updates async. And in particular, to give both like a text update, so you could quickly screen or scan how everyone's doing or like how the week was going, but also record a really quick Loom video. And just drop it in so you could like watch the person talk over their pipeline or the customers they're really excited about or whatnot. And then right at the start of the meeting, folks would either go through and like acknowledge like, oh, I read this, or I've like seen the video or whatnot ahead of time. And as you're digesting them, you'd go down and add questions. So when we got to the actual meeting, everyone's kind of already seen all the updates, knows what's going on. And we can just focus on like the discussion points that we want to go through. I think the other part I really liked about it was the video aspect gave you kind of like a personal feel, even though it was async. So you could see folks and kind of get a sense for who's doing well and how things are going in like that strange world that we're in. One final thing that I really liked about it, which was entertaining for me, you'll notice there's like a button here at the very top, which is watch the week's Looms. And clicking on this would go and like fire open all of the different Loom tabs. And I'd just like pull this one Dory one out. And as I'd like scroll through all my tabs watching them, I just record questions real quick. So it was a small little delighter for me. Perhaps to the theme of, rituals changing though, clearly this works when the team is small. And I guess, Brian, maybe you're better suited to talk to this point, but as the team started to get bigger and we had more and more sales reps, this clearly wasn't going to scale as the team grew. So even that ritual or that process has adapted for us.
Yeah, we had to start watching those Loom videos at 2x speed to try to keep up with everyone who was on the calls now. It's important to manage a growing team with scalable processes, but what I loved about the original ritual was just the personalization and the transparency, and actually being able to hear from everyone on the team, whether they're based in Hawaii, like we have 180, or based in New Hampshire, like we have a CSM. And so as you have this massively distributed team, it was really great to hear directly from them. A couple of things that we've done recently is actually automated this process by using the Gong API, which is very cool. We're now pulling in direct customer conversations. We're using the Salesforce pack to bring in the traditional sales pipeline that most sales leaders would want in terms of your pipeline details, your forecast, your deep account reviews or big deal updates. And so we can really hold true to that core ritual of recording Loom videos or sharing customer conversations, and having the sentiment and this level of transparency. But now we've been able to build in a lot more scale to help manage our quickly growing team. So really nice blend of kind of some of the original 5-person rituals with a quickly expanding go-to-market team rituals. Helena, can you share a little bit on the product side?
Yeah, sure. So, one thing that can be really difficult over Zoom is, getting the sense for, how an idea is really landing. And so, before I can remember having a crit and kind of feeling the vibes of the room, and it's pretty clear, if the proposal and the design feels right or it doesn't. But now having a pulse, in the write-up where you have, some context, you have the designs as well. You can really get a sense for how the team is overall feeling about the proposal. But what's super helpful is to have the details as well, so that you can really work off of that feedback and iterate, because it's not always about making the decision right away, but usually you have to come back and iterate. And so it's really good to have that all in writing and to know what people are thinking is most important around, the proposal that you were sharing.
Yeah, that's great. I know we're short on time here, and we definitely want to get to a couple of questions, and we want to talk about how the audience can actually get started. So maybe Lane, we can hand it back over to you, and can you share a little bit of some tips or best practices on how the audience can think about getting started with the rituals, how they can start to templatize them, and maybe how do they know if they're working or need to be adapted or modified in some version?
Yeah, totally. It's probably easier to show you. Just bring up my screen. So one of the ways that I think it's, one of the ways to get started, probably the easiest way is to take, a write-up that you've done in a different context. Maybe you've written something in a Google Doc and send it out, and just paste it into Coda and add a couple of these elements and see how it works, right? And adapt the ritual as you go. So here's very simply, if you've used Coda a bunch, you know that you can type / and have a set of templates show up. So I just type /read, and here I can choose the done reading button. And this is the thing that we showed earlier, where you can just see if people have actually read the proposal. One fun variation of this is people add this at several different places in a long write-up, so that they can kind of like catalog where people are if they're trying to get to a really meaty discussion at the beginning of a meeting. So don't be afraid to use those liberally. The next one is Pulse. So if you just type Pulse, you can see I can add that really easily. We actually just made a variation of this where you write your reflection in this view right here in this table, and then we're just hiding everyone else's. And so you can uncollapse that and kind of see where everyone else is on this particular proposal. I really like how this doesn't bias you as you're writing yours. And again, feel free to customize this to whatever you want. What are you worried about? I think is a great question, just to get out of the room, as opposed to having to worry about that later at some point. And then the last one is Dory. So type Dory, and you get a question table. Very easy to clear that template out, get it ready for your team. And again, of course, you can customize this in all types of different ways. So adding those three elements at the bottom or in the middle of an existing write-up that you have after you paste it in is probably the easiest way to get started. Another thing to mention, though, is Brian, your second question was around how do these actually evolve? If you find something's working, we recently launched something called custom templates, where you can templatize that for your organization, which I think is particularly effective. So here we have all templates. I just went into this Explore tab here, clicked on templates. Here we have all the templates for Coda, but I also have those that are just sitting in our workspace. And so here are a couple examples where we have a specific couple ways of doing things. Here's a fun way to draft tweet threads from Brian, and a different way of doing project roadmaps that John has kind of customized that works for us. And so this is a way of kind of taking a ritual, modifying it to fit our organization, and then being able to pass it on and let everybody else experience that, which I think is super cool. And we've seen tons and tons of customers adopt this in really interesting ways. So that's a quick rundown on how you can get started. I'll pass it back to you.
Great, thanks, Lane. And just a quick comment: if anyone needs help with this, feel free to visit the Coda community or contact our sales and support team. We'd be more than happy to help anyone with rituals. We have just a couple minutes for Q&A. I'm sure everyone wants to get to the main stage for Reid and Shashir's panel. We have a question from the audience, and maybe Matt, I'll send this one over to you because we're going through this today. Do rituals like these need to be regularly recalibrated, and how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think really short answer is absolutely. Especially, I think one thing that we've observed at Coda, even taking some of those small in-doc templates that Lane was just presenting on, many of those we came across organically. And it came after we introduced like that building block into the product surface. We just kind of saw how folks were using it. Sadly, I can't give credit to the person that did it first, but the done reading button, like that just kind of happened organically. And now it's become a core ritual because it felt like a good best practice. Those are probably like the smaller altitude or lower altitude ones. At the higher altitude, I think a lot of it gets enforced by your meeting cadence and kind of how the broader company operates. Listening to the panel on meetings a little bit earlier, I think some of the timelines they were describing for some of those made a lot of sense for this question too, which was, in the course of every couple of months, it's useful to be looking at how your team individually operates. And then at the half-year mark or whatever, it's useful to look at the broader company one. And then for individuals, it's useful to look regularly. Look at how your personal rituals are working for you, almost each week or on a continuous basis.
Yeah, we actually we do a regular survey as well, which I know Raechel would have loved to have talked about if we had more time. But we actually survey all Codans about our rituals and meeting cadence and make sure we're getting regular feedback quarterly. Raechel, we have another question from the audience, which is, how do you fold new hires into your rituals? And what if there are a lot of rituals? Can you talk a little bit about how we help new Codans adopt these rituals?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question. So we help fold in new hires into our rituals in a few different ways. One of the first ways we do is that getting started guide that Brian mentioned as one of his favorite docs, which our team will be really happy about. But we talk about them in the getting started guide that Codans get, on their first day or a few days before. We also, have new hire onboarding sessions in which we go over our rituals. Including, in those sessions, having Dories and Pulses in there to start to get them used to that, even in that safer group of, just a bunch of new hires. And in some of those onboarding sessions, we actually go over rituals in a little bit more depth. So from, Eigenquestions to TUI writeups, to, talking more about our values and culture. So really try to get them indoctrinated very, very early on. And then, keeping folks updated. We get together pretty regularly as a whole company. So as rituals evolve, we're talking about it in our Friday demos or, in our other regular team meetings.
Yeah, that's great. As we reflect back on Bing Gordon's quote around rituals, they're named, they're templated, and every employee knows them by the end of the first Friday. What I have noticed is that a lot of companies have these rituals. They maybe just are not named and templated. And so you might be experiencing them all the time. One thing that really helps with onboarding is having them named and templated. Again, this was the rituals of Coda. I hope that everybody enjoyed the discussion. We'd love to take the discussion online. So feel free to meet us in the community or on social or reach out to your sales and success team. And we hope that everyone can join us back on the main stage with Reid Hoffman and Shashir for a very interesting fireside chat. Thank you for joining Block Party.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Bye, thanks.